Hey everyone, I'm Mandy and I'm here with Rhonda, and we're back just kind of having another conversation. The world's starting to reopen, and we were just talking about how it's just creating a lot of tension. I've even noticed it within myself. I'm observing how I feel around others if I'm having to go somewhere, and it just feels really complicated.
Complicated's a great word. And we know that all of us have our own ways of coping and including some of the ways that we act. They show up when our brain perceives a threat. And our amygdala, that part of our brain that's our threat detector. Some of our thought responses and behavioral responses are some self-righteousness and judgment. Why are they doing this? Why aren't they doing this? Do they understand what 6 feet is? All of those things, whatever side of all of this you come out on. In theory, though, those judgments, those perceived threats are there to keep us safe. But if we stay in those thoughts about other people, and by that I just mean we're making assumptions. Um, and I've felt it in stores. You've said the same thing, or outside of stores. Just people looking at others who have a mask or who don't have a mask. And what we know is if we stay in that kind of scrutiny and judgment, our brain starts to marinate or ruminate in those spaces. It actually keeps us stuck.
Yeah.
And some of the emotions it keeps us stuck in are resentment and stress and all of that. Remember, our brain detects a threat, and there is this threat right now that we don't know how to handle necessarily. We don't know the end of, and it takes us being in this threat state and thinking all these negative thought patterns takes us out of connection with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And with how we really feel, because if I'm honest, what I really feel is afraid.
Yeah. Yeah. And we assign some sort of story to somebody else about how we're feeling. And in this research article that even came out about it, they talk about how we attribute certain things to other people and how it affects us. And that might be attributing a negative assumption about the other person. So we're making this story up in our head about how why they're doing what they're doing, or why they gave us that look, or they didn't do that, or whatever it may be. Or maybe we don't do that, but we give them the benefit of the doubt, and we're gracious and generous with what we're assuming about them. And then there's we can maybe think that, well, maybe they're doing this thing for a negative intent, but they're not a bad person, or something like that. Whatever the range is, the research shows that when we give people the benefit of the doubt, it actually helps us. And when you think about it, the only thing that you truly have any control over is what goes on within you and how you choose to respond to what's going on within you. I know for me, like, even when I've gone out to the store, I've noticed other people noticing other people, and me noticing other people, and other people
It's a lot of
noticing me.
noticing.
And they'll give me a look, or I'll maybe even give them a look, and then like all these stories go through like my mind, or I think, what are they thinking of me, or whatever it may be. And it's like, well, they're not following the rules, and I just catch this negativity, and it doesn't feel good, and it keeps my alarm system up, and then I just feel like negative towards like people in general, when in reality is that people are probably just doing the best that they can.
Mm. That's a really good statement. And Brene Brown talks about practicing generous assumptions.
Yeah.
And that's part of the good news. We can shift and practice being the key word, doing this a different way. Our natural threat system, it gets activated. But if we can just stop and get curious, what is going on with me? Curious about me before them.
Yeah.
I'm making up this whole story about these people and I have no idea what's really happening. Make a generous assumption. And you said it, people are just doing the best they can right now.
Yeah.
And we have to practice this because our natural bent is to self-protect.
Mm-hmm.
But if I can connect with what's underneath for me, then I can breathe a little bit and think about making a different assumption about them, or none at all.
Yeah.
You have a good phrase for this. What's the phrase you use?
Yeah. So pay attention to the tension. It's
Mm,
kind of like when I notice that I'm holding my breath, because that's what I do when I get anxious,
me too.
or feel it in my chest. Pay attention to it, notice it. I love that word, be curious about it. You don't want to ever be the judge of your own feelings or
What do you mean?
someone else's. So I'm anxious, and so now I'm judging myself for being anxious or feeling like I shouldn't be anxious, or making a judgment about someone else because they made me anxious. You never want to be the judge. You want to be like the little inner scientist, the person who's curious and compassionate. And so notice that, because that from that point, when you hit the pause button, you can then choose what narrative you want to believe about the other person. Even if the first one that came up in your mind was an automatic negative one, you don't have to continue with that one.
Right.
You can rewrite the script anytime you want. And that's going to, like you said, it's going to help deactivate that threat system that's producing all that cortisol and adrenaline in your body,
And
and help you feel better.
what we know with that is that that also shifts some of the focus of the brain activity. In the education world, we talk a lot about brains that are ready to learn. And that's where the threat center has a little bit less activity in it. And we can get activity all over the brain and creative and encode more information. We're ready to learn. We're ready to be out in the world a little bit more with care.
Yeah. Awesome. So we're having this conversation and wanted to share it with you guys. I hope everyone can take a breath and breathe and check the negative assumptions so that we can all continue to be a little better as we navigate the world reopening.